everyone. It's nice to see such a full house today. My name is Jake Sherman. I'm the director of the Brian Urquhart Center for Peace Operations here at IPI. This year is one with many big milestones for Somalia's efforts to overcome nearly 3 decades of armed conflict, not the least of which is holding the country's first direct elections since 1969. Gradual progress has been made in other priority areas as well, from debt relief to security sector reform. Nonetheless, much remains to be done. Somalia faces significant security, political, humanitarian, and development challenges. Al-Shabaab poses a credible security threat in large areas of the country, including in Mogadishu. The impasse between the federal government and the federal member states remains a significant obstacle to state building. And the humanitarian situation is extremely serious, with nearly 5.2 million people requiring humanitarian assistance in response to conflict, floods, drought, land degradation, and water scarcity. To discuss the situation in Somalia and upcoming priorities, I'm very pleased to welcome Mr. James Swan, the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Somalia and head of the UN Assistance Mission in Somalia, UNSOM. Mr. Swan was appointed in May 2019. He's an experienced diplomat with a long international career in the United States government, having served as ambassador to the Democratic Republic of the Congo from 2013 to 2016, U.S. Special Representative for Somalia from 2011 to 2013, and ambassador to Djibouti from 2008 to 2011, among other postings. Before I give the floor to SRSG Swan, I'd like to first invite Ambassador Karen Pierce, the permanent representative of the United Kingdom and the pen holder on UNSOM, to make brief remarks. Ambassador Pierce.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much to Jake and to IPI for having us here again for these very good and compelling sessions. And thank you, I'm looking at the wrong Warren, not at Warren. Thank you to the SRSG. Warren was quite worried about that then. He thought he was on a plane to Mogadishu. Thank you to the Special Representative for giving up his time to come and join these panel discussions. I have to say, I don't think we can do this sort of thing too much. So thank you again to both you and Jake for this. I think we all know that this is a crucial year for Somalia. As Jake said, the United Kingdom is the penholder on the Security Council, which means we lead the work that the Security Council does on Somalia political and on AMISOM. And from the UK's perspective, Somalia has long been an important priority for us. We held the conference in, I think, 2017 to try and get things back on track. Before that, we'd held one in 2012. It's very important that the international community doesn't take its eye off this very important part of Africa. And of course, we all share the same goal of an increasingly secure, stable, prosperous Somalia. And the aims of the conferences, which other member states have helpfully continued, is to try and get all the actors, both in Somalia and international, on the same page around a shared vision, and then set out what reforms are necessary along the political, security and development tracks in the hope that that critical mass, if you like, can make a difference on the ground. As the United Kingdom, we have been supporting Somali government's National Development Plan. We provide significant humanitarian funding, and we are helping the Somali police build capacity. We also help fund the AU mission and support broader security reforms through it. And the AU mission, as you know, is there to primarily help the Somali government tackle the threat posed by Al-Shabaab. All this UK support has totaled around $400 million just last year alone. So it is a very important topic, and it's an important topic for very many Security Council members. I think 10 years ago, we would have had a very different conversation about Somalia. Now there are lots of positive things to say about the progress made. That's a tribute to the Somali people, a tribute to the government, a tribute to the UN. There have been important strides made by the government towards debt relief. Somali government is engaging with several of the human rights treaty bodies, and it's committed to making the necessary political, economic and security reforms to embed stability in Somalia. But there are many challenges, as we all know, and I think it would be premature to say we have turned the corner, though I look forward to what Jim thinks about that. Obviously, Al-Shabaab remains a serious threat to security and stability, not just in Somalia, but in the region, and that in turn impacts on how Somalia's neighbours view Somalia. We still have a very protracted humanitarian crisis, and the reforms are slowing, in part because of the difficult relationships between the federal government and the federal member states. We need to keep our eye on elections, which are planned at the end of this year or possibly beginning of next year. The electoral law has been passed, but there are still many issues that need resolving if the elections are to be successful and not held with undue delay. And these issues include things like the definition of constituencies, the allocation of seats to constituencies, determining how the 30% quota of seats for women will be implemented. Now, I have to say it's good, full marks to Somalia for committing to that. It's not something that many Western countries have, for example, including mine. And obviously the management of seats for Somaliland and Benadir. But we would say that the central factor in whether all these things will eventually be a success is the critical ability of the federal government and the federal member states to work together to resolve these questions around power sharing, resource sharing, and a shared commitment and plan to building a strong rather than a weak federal state. And I think that lies at the heart of a lot of the problems we see. And I think it's not an exaggeration to say that at the moment the relationship between the federal government and the federal member states is at an impasse. Now, we know that the AU plays a very important role in Somalia. I've mentioned the region. The UN, of course, sits above all that. The UN is absolutely critical to bringing these efforts together and providing advice and support to the Somali government. We all want to support Jim Swan. You should let us know what you need. I think it was a pity that the Somali government chose to engage with Jim's predecessor in the way they did, and a pity about the way they have handled issues around the panel of experts. We are ready to offer solutions on those panel of experts membership. So I really would appeal to the Somali government not to make that something of a trial of strength with the international community. There are many more important things that the government needs to get on with. So I will end there and happily hand over to Jim. Thank you very much. Thank you for your interest in Somalia, and we look forward to working with Jim and others, and Warren if he ever gets there to Mogadishu, as we try and make Somalia more prosperous, stable and secure. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and my sincere thanks, first of all, to IPI and to Jake for organizing this event and the opportunity to address all of you today. I've been back in New York just for a few days, primarily to present a briefing to the Security Council, which I do quarterly under the Security Council mandate for our mission. But it's a great opportunity also to meet with a range of other people who are interested in Somalia. I should point out that the remarks yesterday to the Security Council, I think, have also been picked up and broadcast quite widely. We also publish quarterly a report on behalf of the Secretary General concerning developments in Somalia, so there is quite a bit of material for those who may want to dig into these issues yet further. Before we get to specific details of the current situation in Somalia, I do want to start by stressing a point that was made by the ambassador about progress in Somalia. We often are in a business in which we're focused on immediate challenges, problems still to be overcome, but it is important to take stock of the very significant progress that has been achieved in Somalia over the past decade. It's progress on the security side. Frankly, a decade ago, a conversation about security in Somalia started with the fact that the transitional federal government of the time occupied only a portion of the capital, Mogadishu. A decade ago, with the exception of Puntland, there were no organized federal member states that were contributing to this federal model. A decade ago, frankly, our focus was almost entirely on humanitarian assistance to Somalia, with very little discussion of longer-term development programming and our objectives for the future. And I think while there are still many, many challenges that lie ahead, it's important that we never start a conversation on Somalia without first acknowledging the very significant progress, the hard-won progress, for which I think Somalis should justifiably take considerable pride. Before I turn to current developments, I also want to share with you what the Secretary General told me before I first went out to Somalia last summer. And that was never forget that our primary objective is to help the Somali people. We often become very focused on urgent security needs. We often become very focused on short-term political problems. But at the end of the day, we in the UN family, and I hope the international community more broadly, never loses sight that there are some 12 to 15 million Somalis who have had a rough go of it over the last 3 decades and very much need our collective support. And that means women, it means youth, it means displaced persons, it means minority groups, it means those with disabilities, and it means trying to address their requirements for better security, for service delivery from their government, from quality governance that allows them to participate in the decisions of their country. So I keep that guidance in mind, and I think as we have this discussion, let's not lose sight of the importance of the Somali people at the center of all that we're trying to do. Now, it has become a common refrain in recent months that 2020 is a critical year for Somalia. 2020 is to be the year of delivery, the year of achievement. And I think we absolutely subscribe to that analysis. I should stress that it is, frankly, a position that is not one driven by international partners. It's fundamentally a position presented by the Somali government that 2020 requires that we address critical priorities together. The Somalis established these priorities through a set of roadmaps developed between 2018 and 2019, and we as the international community are now seeking to support their advancement. These roadmaps were also embraced, prioritized, and taken to a strategic level by the Somali government and its international partners last October at the Somalia Partnership Forum, in which we agreed on something called the Mutual Accountability Framework, with objectives established by the Somalis, but commitments also by international partners to support progress in 4 key areas: inclusive politics, security and justice, economic reforms, and social development. And I'm going to cover those just briefly before we get to the Q&A session in a moment. So the first priority established by the government and to which partners have also subscribed is inclusive politics. This has as a priority organization of one person, one vote elections in 2020. This is a constitutional requirement, and it is a requirement embraced by the government and most recently by the Parliament in the adoption of an electoral code. We all should be clear at the outset that when we talk about one person, one vote elections in Somalia, there is realism that in many areas of the country this may prove difficult from a security standpoint or an access standpoint. But the effort is to move beyond the previous elders-based selection system in which a hand-picked group of elders from the different sub-clans selected individual members of parliament who in turn indirectly elected the president. Working through the National Independent Electoral Commission, efforts are underway to put in place mechanisms that would allow these elections to occur before the end of 2020. The electoral code adopted by Parliament and signed by the President earlier this month effectively represents a hybrid model in which the members of Parliament would continue to be affiliated with their sub-clan constituencies, but rather than be chosen by a small hand-picked group of elders, would instead be elected through direct voting by Somali citizens. So it would preserve a clan-based distribution, but at the same time it would allow for direct voting and for citizens' participation in the balloting. This will necessarily require continued efforts at improving security within Somalia. A national electoral security task force was established in September. It has met several times since then under the chairmanship of the Commissioner of Police. But preparations for election security will continue to be a priority that requires further attention by this election security task force. The National Independent Electoral Commission has already identified in 3 federal member states areas known as securable locations, and we look forward to continuing to work with the Electoral Commission and with other key stakeholders to identify what constituencies could be placed throughout the country. Although the Electoral Code has been adopted, and this represents an important milestone that enshrines legally a move to one person, one vote elections, as the ambassador noted, and as Jake noted in his opening remarks, there are many unanswered questions still regarding the electoral process, including exactly where the constituencies will be located, how 30% representation for women can be maintained, how certain constituencies in some areas of the country can be guaranteed representation, notably from those communities in what's known as Somaliland, as well as some in the capital Benadir Regional Administration. So this is going to require a continued effort. Our understanding is that the Parliament intends now to establish committees that will work with the Electoral Committee to seek to resolve some of these residual issues that need answers in order for the Electoral Commission to proceed with organization of the elections. But time is running short. It will be important to have details regarding how implementation can proceed. It will be important to work out these security issues, and it will be important for key donor partners to be satisfied with the preparatory elements and therefore in a position to finance these elections. So I think that's the main issue under inclusive politics that was discussed as part of the mutual accountability framework, elections. Secondly, on security, the second topic agreed under the mutual accountability framework, security and justice. Al-Shabaab clearly remains the principal threat from a security standpoint in Somalia. And although great progress was made against Al-Shabaab, particularly during the period 2009 to 2013-14, in moving it out of the major urban areas, Al-Shabaab continues to retain a presence in many rural areas and many small and medium-sized towns across the country. It's also clear that it continues to retain the capability to conduct, in some cases, dramatic and shocking terrorist attacks, including in Mogadishu and in other towns in Somalia, and in some cases outside Somalia, particularly in Kenya. In terms of the government's efforts to address that security threat, we've seen the government make very important progress on institutional reforms in the security sector. In response to an operational readiness assessment in 2017, which demonstrated important gaps in the Somali security services capabilities, the government faced this honestly and squarely and undertook a number of subsequent reforms. These included completing biometric registration for the security services personnel. It included introducing direct payment through the banking system of military and other security services personnel. It has included establishing updated personnel procedures, including maintaining detailed records for members of the security forces. So I think we've seen in this arena significant efforts and progress organized and launched and implemented by the government. Operationally, important efforts were initiated in the middle of 2019, particularly with military operations in Lower Shabelle to the west of Mogadishu, with combined operations involving the Somali National Army, involving AMISOM personnel, supported by some of the key international bilateral security partners, and pushed out approximately 70 kilometers from Mogadishu to capture 4 towns in Lower Shabelle in an effort to create greater security cordon around Mogadishu. Much of this progress was achieved thanks to strong leadership by the central government in Somalia in identifying these priorities, these operational requirements, and using that to drive a combined and consolidated effort to take these towns. Nonetheless, we have seen some slowing of that effort, partly as a consequence of some weather conditions, but partly also due to levels of force generation by the Somali military that have been insufficient to permit the operations to continue. So as we look forward on the security front, we believe it will be very important for that clear strategic focus and direction to be offered by the Somali government in terms of what are the central operational priorities to be attained, and at the same time to see the necessary force generation and clarity to partners in regard to what support requirements are needed. So that was in regard to security and justice. With regard to social development, the government has adopted and disseminated a national development plan that is aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations system and its partners. That national development plan was very carefully coordinated with key donor actors to ensure that it responded to the SDG requirements. That national development plan is also the basis around which donor partners have agreed to align their support going forward. We look forward to that plan being costed out between now and June and being the basis upon which donors align behind those priorities going forward. I should highlight that, of course, Somalia continues to be in dire need of humanitarian assistance and support. We've seen recurring cycles of this between 1990 and today. There have been some 30 humanitarian emergencies, both droughts and floods. And to give an idea of the order of magnitude of the requirements, last year the humanitarian response plan supported by the donor community exceeded $1 billion for Somalia. And we expect that the requirements will be at an equivalent level in 2020. So the needs remain very substantial, but we are encouraged that the National Development Plan offers a way forward that seeks to build on a humanitarian development and peace-building nexus that we hope will be able to address not only urgent humanitarian needs, but also longer-term development and peace-building requirements. Let me turn now to economic reforms. This is an area where, frankly, very significant progress has been achieved. Somalia was approved just in the past 10 days as eligible for reaching decision point under the Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative. This effectively opens the door to clearance of more than $5 billion in long-standing debts. Frankly, for those who may have been working on Somalia in recent years, it is almost unimaginable that this point has been achieved. 2 years ago, it would have been ridiculed as a possibility, but it has been a remarkable achievement, showing a commitment by the government to significant public financial management reforms. It's represented terrific collaboration and partnership with the international financial institutions and with some key donor champions, including the United Kingdom, Norway, and the European Union, to help advance this effort at debt relief. And it has been a wonderful example of collaboration between the central government and the federal member states, as the finance ministers of those entities have collaborated very closely in moving this dossier forward. So we are expecting that at the end of March there will be a final determination made by the International Monetary Fund that Somalia does indeed qualify to reach decision point under the Enhanced Heavily Indebted Poor Country Initiative. And this will lead to inflows of more predictable financing that can be led by the government in terms of supporting national projects around service delivery, around infrastructure, and the like. So I think we see that there has been quite substantial progress achieved across many of these issue areas. Many of them require continued technical and practical work, particularly in regard to preparation for elections and in regard to the need for further force generation and clear operational priorities around security. But to see durable progress on these topics, an important component that in our view must be reinforced is that of forging a broader political consensus within the country. We see, particularly on the electoral process, that a lack of consensus and collaboration that clearly brings together the central government and all of the federal member states risks impeding progress on this important priority. We are concerned that there has not been a meeting bringing together the President and all 5 of the federal member states since May of 2019. The government has highlighted 2020 as this year of priority delivery, and we think it's very important that there be further reinforced efforts to develop a consensus. And that involves a consensus not just with the federal member states, but with key opposition and other civil society and political figures who can help ensure that there are common views as to how to move forward in Somalia in 2020. With that, let me just underscore again that these are effectively priorities that have been outlined by the Somali authorities themselves. We as international partners certainly being supported by the United Nations, are seeking to advance these priorities in a constructive way. We think there are some technical aspects on which we're helping. We're providing direct assistance in regard to the National Independent Electoral Commission. We have been actively engaged on security cooperation. We have offered a number of suggestions in terms of organizing federal government, federal member state collaboration. But there's only so much that can be done at the technical level without an urgently needed political consensus that requires dialogue among all of the key Somali political actors as a way to move forward and ensure achievement of these 2020 priorities. Thank you.